What's up out there, everybody? Welcome to Movies Never Say Die, your home for 80s and 90s retro movie content. I hope you guys are all doing fantastic out there today. We have hit October, which means it's horror movie season. I know for some of you guys, it's always horror movie season, but for this month, I always love to go back and revisit some of my favorite horror movies. I definitely think the 80s was the best decade for the genre. The effects were mostly practical, the story ideas were endless, and the makeup work was impressive. This list is going to be filled with icons from the genre, and it's going to have a range of different horror types. I'm going to be covering 15 movies in this list. I'm going to go through them a little quicker than I normally do, so buckle up, turn off the lights, get your snacks, and let's get into the best horror movies from the 1980s. Kicking this list off at number 15 is a movie about a little pet with a few rules. You do not get them wet, you keep them out of bright lights, and you never feed them after midnight. These rules were, of course, broken, and the result would be a classic in 1984's Gremlins, directed by Joe Dante, starring Zach Galligan, Phoebe Cates, and a furry little pop culture icon. Personally, I think Gremlins plays great both during Christmas or Halloween, whichever you prefer, and with its awesome practical effects, its inventive story, and really just a delightfully mean-spirited sense of humor that this movie delivers a bit of it all. I remember watching it as a kid and just loving the humor, loving the elevation of the suspense as the violence ramped up when the town gets taken over, and I just loved, of course, how cool all the different gremlins were, and really, even as an adult, this bizarre little movie can still just connect to the kid inside of yourself for an entertaining ride. I think Zach Galligan is solid. He's natural in the lead. Phoebe Cates, as depressing as she was with all her sad stories, is a great addition as well. And with the small town vibe, I think you can easily get pulled into this little story. Then as the gremlins begin to wreak havoc and the violent action increases, the entertainment value only elevates as well as the plot delivers more than a handful of memorable sequences of comical mayhem and horror. Moving along to number 14 is a film that would kick off a long-lasting franchise when a group of teenagers would venture out to Camp Crystal Lake and never return in Friday the 13th from 1980, directed by Sean S. Cunningham, starring Betsy Palmer, Kevin Bacon, Adrian Knight, and Janine Taylor. Sure, this movie doesn't even have the traditional Jason Voorhees that we know and love, yet Friday the 13th is still a very thrilling and just nostalgically campy ride of a mother getting revenge that's always been a great time to watch during the Halloween season. Now, Friday the 13th, it is iconic, but to me, it's far from a top-tier horror movie. However, I do think it does the slasher formula extremely well, and as teenagers start getting picked off, the suspense and the frightening sequences and the tension does rise up enough to have a good time with this movie. The performances are average for the genre. You could really care less about any of the characters as the body count piles up, but this movie's fantastic musical scoring, the on-location shoot, and the low-budget vibe easily makes it a movie that's just a worthy staple in the horror genre. And yes, after the first viewing and knowing the third act twist, much of the intensity is lost, but with its short runtime and frequent acts of bloody violence, Friday the 13th is a chilling beginning to a franchise that, like its iconic killer, will never die. Speaking of never-ending franchises, the tagline for my 13 pick claimed that when people had nightmares, they dreamt of Freddy, and when Freddy had nightmares, he dreamt of Chucky. I'm not necessarily sure that's true, but it certainly is clever, and the movie is, of course, 1988's Child's Play, directed by Tom Holland, starring Catherine Hicks, Alex Vincent, and Brad Dourif. By pulling off both humor and horror, I always love watching Child's Play during the Halloween season, and while not necessarily on the same level of Freddy Krueger, I do love and enjoy the twisted charisma of the murderous Chucky. He's certainly an infamous character in the horror genre, and here he gets plenty of kills in his first film as he just relentlessly torments poor little Andy. So overall, I certainly think that Child's Play is a fun, textbook horror film that blends humor with an ominous atmosphere from Holland's direction to tell a tightly paced story that never gets a chance to wear out its welcome. I think Brad Dourif as the voice of Chucky is just a perfect casting. He easily just brings the sadistic personality of Chucky to life with ease, and he's complemented by what I think are just effective practical effects, making Chucky's movements look legit. Child's Play overall is just a fast-moving movie. It has a nostalgic, campy vibe to it. The performances are solid as well, and with an undeniable self-awareness and effective spots of horror and just a truly memorable villain, seeing Chucky rampage will always just be a wildly fun ride. Next up at number 12 is a modestly forgotten vampire flick. At dawn they hide, at dark they wake, at night they search for blood. In Near Dark from 1987, directed by Catherine Bigelow, starring Adrian Pasdar, Jenny Wright, Lance Henriksen, Bill Paxton, Tim Thomerson, and Jeanette Goldstein. This is a movie many of you would maybe leave off of your lists, but personally I always enjoy this oddly grounded ride inside the vampire genre. I think the central plot of this guy getting bit and falling in with a gang of vampires is just really perfect for telling a thrilling horror movie, and at times that's exactly what this film is. However, where Near Dark I think surprises and effectively entertains is in how Bigelow is able to strip away a lot of the usual elements of the vampire genre. Yes, all the traditional rules are securely in place, but many other tropes are left behind. They're abandoned for this movie. This group of primal nomads are very gritty. They're just relentless. They're vicious, and just, I think, perfect for building a lot of intrigue for this story. Near Dark, in my opinion, also boasts an understated just cinematic artistry with how Bigelow's able to just use stark landscapes and how she's able to manipulate a lot of lighting and shadows. I think all of this gives Near Dark just a charming horror vibe with plenty of energy and a lot of charm from the performances, all of which are great for the Halloween season. And to this day, I still think Near Dark is undermentioned when talking about retro vampire flicks. In at number 11 is a sequel that claimed to be the horror smash hit of the 80s, as it followed up a film that was considered to be the horror smash hit of the 70s when Michael Myers would return in 1981's Halloween 2, directed by Rick Rosenthal, starring Jamie Lee Curtis, Donald Pleasance, Lance Guest, and Dick Warlock. Now, I've never claimed to be a horror cinephile or an aficionado of the genre or a super fan of slasher flicks or anything like that. I do get the appeal of 78's Halloween. I like the movie, but I've always liked this sequel better. I just like the Titan's pace. I think it's filled with many more spots of unnerving horror and suspense, and it's just a better showcase of the true wrath of Michael Myers. There's just more going on in this movie. The story plays really good inside of the hospital with all of the lurking shadows, these spots of isolation, and confined hallways to create frightening spots of dread. The original Halloween is great. It's a certified classic, but I think seeing the character pulled into the faster paced genre of the 80s slasher in this sequel is a great time. And with all the heightened gore and violence, I think Halloween 2 is just a blast of nostalgia, but still able to deliver an engaging story that can lure you in. I do think it's well directed. The scoring and the ominous tone of the original are carried on here as well. So I still contend that Halloween 2 is the most entertaining film in the franchise, narrowly beating out its predecessor. Next up at number 10 is a movie that brought horror to everybody's neighborhood when a kid suspects that a vampire is his next door neighbor in 1985's Fright Night, written and directed by Tom Holland, starring Chris Sarandon, Amanda Bierce, Roddy McDowall, and William Ragsdale. I don't know what it is, but I'll always have a soft spot for Fright Night. I watched it so many times as a kid. I've always preferred this vampire flick over The Lost Boys, and I still think it holds up great. The performances are solid for the needs of their roles. The film's pacing is tight, and with just delightfully suspenseful moments punctuated by sound comedic relief, I think Fright Night is still an awesome roller coaster ride of tension and camp and laughs. I also think the special effects are impressive and we're ahead of their time. Fright Night still just has that charming visual appeal to it all these years later, and it's just a wildly fun movie. I think it did new things in the vampire genre. It's a movie that very much feels like its own thing, but you can see where it's paying homage to the classics of the horror genre. It's a wild vampire story just dropped into the suburbs, and to me it's just a piece of 80s magic that has a timeless quality to it, from the campy vibe to its delightfully ominous atmosphere and the high energy performances. Fright Night is just a complete treat. Coming up next at number 9 is another iconic 80s horror flick. It's a demon to some, it's an angel to others, and it will tear your soul apart. In 1987's Hellraiser, written and directed by Clive Barker, starring Andrew Robinson, Claire Higgins, Ashley Lawrence, and Oliver Smith. Now, to be honest, I didn't really understand the plot of Hellraiser as a kid, but the gruesome special effects and the terrifying atmosphere of this movie just made Pinhead and Hellraiser a more than memorable film for me growing up. The concept behind Pinhead to me is just off the charts, with all the pins and nails coming out of its face. It's just awesome. And now as an adult, I can see where this plot was going with its blend of just manipulation and sex and gore, and I still think it holds up as just an atmospheric ride to the dark side with ambitious themes and more than disturbing visuals. I'm not really a fan of ultra gore and buckets of blood. I prefer more of a mood and a mystery and a suspense, but I actually think Hellraiser delivers both. The performances are solid, the movie just delivers tons of nostalgia, and its visuals were far ahead of its time. This movie has spawned 9 or 10 sequels, but the original I think is still supreme and easily one of my favorites in the genre during the 80s, even if I still think the movie needed more Pinhead in it. The tagline for my number 8 pick is certainly a lofty one, claiming that this monster movie to be a masterpiece of terror when 2 college students on a walking tour are attacked by a monster. In 1981's An American Werewolf in London, written and directed by John Landis, starring David Naughton and Griffin Dunne. Now, this was a movie that terrified me as a kid. I remember before moving up to Seattle with my grandma, I lived around LA with my mom. She would once in a while bring me on dates when there was no babysitter around, and she had gone to some dude's house one night and they were watching this movie. I was, of course, supposed to be asleep in some bedroom somewhere, but instead I was at the top of the stairs peering around the corner and watching this movie over their shoulders. And I think this could easily be the first film, that really just, I remember delivering just a chilling atmosphere that I could just feel as a kid. This movie really stuck with me for a long time, probably because I was way too young to be watching it, but as an adult, I still enjoy it. I love the setup for this story. I think it's excellent. It's methodical. You can sense something is about to happen, and when it does, the result is some of the more iconic moments in 80s horror. This was another movie that I think was far ahead of its time in terms of practical effects. The makeup work and the transformations are just sickly realistic, and it's perfect for this movie. The rewatch value, I think, is extremely high due to the mood that this movie creates, the natural connection you can get from the performances, and it's a perfect movie to watch during each Halloween season. Moving along to my number 7 pick is another werewolf movie, this one from 1981, that said, "When the howling starts, the horror begins," in The Howling, directed by Joe Dante, starring Dee Wallace, Kevin McCarthy, Dennis Duggan, and Belinda Balaski. Now, I would assume I'd have this movie higher on my list than some of you would have it, if it would even make a lot of your lists, but personally, I remember watching The Howling as a kid with my older cousins, and I just still have a great time with it today. It's certainly pure horror, but it also has a charming sense of humor to it. I think it has plenty of engaging tension swings. The direction is sound, with a great use of shadows and mystery to kind of build uneasiness when needed. It also has a fun 70s vibe to it that's just great for building a charming just time period atmosphere, which is always an important element in a horror movie. I also also always found werewolves to be interesting, frightening, and scary, and I think The Howling is a great werewolf flick. Plus, you get the legend herself, Dee Wallace, in the lead, who I think easily brings all the needed range for this role as she comes to learn what's happening all around her. The supporting cast is solid, the creature effects are awesome and menacing in my opinion as well, and overall I think The Howling is just a smart film. It was innovative, and to me it's an underrated 80s horror gem. My number 6 pick was labeled as John Carpenter's Tale of Vengeance from Beyond the Grave. Lock your doors and bolt your windows. There's something in The Fog from 1980, starring Adrienne Barbeau, Jamie Lee Curtis, Tom Atkins, and Janet Leigh. Few films build atmosphere better than The Fog, as it actually uses the fog for visual suspense and tension while simultaneously using it metaphorically as the mystery around it evolves. This movie, I think, is a master class in methodical storytelling as the fog consumes this small town, the tension increases and the mystery grows more compelling. I think the performances really are perfect for the needs of these characters. I think Carpenter is a great storyteller, but to me, he wasn't always the best at writing for his characters, and he's often been able to assemble a cast that could take the idea he has for these characters and run with them, and that is certainly the case here with Curtis and Barbeau and others. The Fog also, I think, thrives on its just a minimalistic approach. It's a movie that leaves you to kind of use your own imagination, and I really do appreciate that. It could have easily gone in other directions to deliver just more visual gusto like many other genre films were from the time, but instead, The Fog kind of did its own thing. It blended storytelling with viewer imagination, and I think it did so about as good as any horror movie can. We have reached the top 5, and I have another John Carpenter movie for you guys. When you're in the coldest place on earth, the warmest place to hide sometime is inside man. In 1982's The Thing, starring a fantastic ensemble cast featuring Kurt Russell, Keith David, Richard Masur, Wilford Brimley, and many others. Easily a classic in the subgenre of body horror, The Thing is always able to provide a dark and dreadful and just frigid ride of unnerving tension, shocking visuals, and frightening confined suspense when you're in the mood. I think the Antarctic settings create an awesome atmosphere with an uneasiness and just looming feeling of helplessness because of the isolation. Then you get this great ensemble cast. I really loved Kurt Russell as a kid. I remember watching this movie on cable so many times, and from a kid hiding behind his fingers to cringing as an adult as this small crew is tore apart by The Thing, I still love this movie. I think the practical effects are just perfect. They're gross, just hideous to look at. The performances, I think, are easily able to heighten some of the shortcomings in Carpenter's screenplay, and even if you know the outcome, seeing it get there is still thrilling and horrific. It starts with a methodical buildup. It pulls you in as you can feel something terrible is about to happen, and then The Thing just puts its foot on the gas and never lets up until the end credits roll, and it's still a total blast today. Next up at number 4 is a classic from David Cronenberg. It's half man, half insect, and total terror in The Fly from 1986, starring Jeff Goldblum, Gina Davis, and John Getz. Now, The Fly is a movie I without question do appreciate because of the excellence that Cronenberg delivers here. However, I don't really find myself coming back to it on a yearly basis like a lot of other movies on this list. Yet, when I do sit down for The Fly, it never fails to captivate me. I think the special effects and the makeup work is just a tremendous strength. The visuals are just gross and sickening and genuinely unpleasant, which is the sole purpose. Yet what I really love about this movie, I think the most, is I would say the performances from Goldblum and Davis. They are so good here. They are so awesome together to really just effortlessly sell the love story at the core of this plot. They bring so much heart and emotion to these characters that I really think does complement the horror elements while also giving the movie somewhat of a heartbreaking undercurrent. The Fly really has a lot of emotional highs and lows as the excitement of a breakthrough scientific experiment turns into just a nightmarish exploration of body horror, and I would consider this remake itself to be a timeless classic. Coming up next at number 3 is one of my truly all-time favorite horror sequels, this one a part 3, and if you think you're gonna get out alive, you must be dreaming. In Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, Dream Warrior, starring Heather Langenkamp, Robert Englund, and Patricia Arquette, directed by Chuck Russell. Growing up, there was just something I always loved about Dream Warriors. I think it's easily the best of the franchise outside of the first. I think it absolutely thrives once again on its practical effects and through just the sinister ambition on display when these kills. I think the movie absolutely had the budget, and it certainly utilized it to create some of the franchise's most visually iconic moments. The dark and ominous psychiatric hospital, I think, is the perfect playground for Freddy to just relentlessly attack these characters in a variety of frightening and thrilling and gruesome ways. And I think Freddy Krueger's nasty sense of humor in Dream Warriors is running at full speed as well. Englund is just awesome in this turn. He's taking these characters out in a variety of comical and brutal ways and tormenting them the entire time. The familiar scoring is in place. The visual appeal, as I said, is sound. It's a very moody looking movie, and this plot, I think, is one of the best in the franchise. You actually care a little bit about these innocent characters. You can connect with and feel their helplessness, yet seeing Freddy Krueger taking them out in their dreams is still a pleasurable ride of nostalgic horror, carnage, Krueger charm, and unnerving suspense. Horror has never hit the suburbs harder than in my number 2 pick, about an entity that destroys a family and their home, in 1982's Poltergeist, starring Craig T. Nelson, Jo Beth Williams, Heather O'Rourke, Virginia Kaiser, and Dominique Dunn. This is a movie that many of you may be surprised to see so high up on my list, but I absolutely love this movie. I think Poltergeist is just a well-crafted horror movie across the board. Front and center, you get a very compelling story. It's grounded for the most part. Sure, it gets completely bonkers on the back end, but leading up to it is a film that connects you with this normal suburban family effectively. Thus, you can invest a little bit more in their harrowing journey as the occurrences continually ramp up with intensity. The performances are all strong. I loved Nelson and Williams in the leads here. They just feel like the prototypical 80s parents, and I think the blend of practical and digital effects are awesome. Poltergeist is very eerie, it's unnerving in the right places, and you can easily get pulled into it. I think no matter how many times you've seen it, I think Poltergeist is part thriller, it's part horror, part drama. It all just gels together nicely, and when the full throttle finale comes to a satisfying close, you can feel a huge release of tension. And for my number 1 pick, my personal favorite horror movie from the 80s is none other than the introduction of Freddy Krueger, a psychopath that kills you in your dreams, in A Nightmare on Elm Street from 1984, written and directed by Wes Craven, starring Robert Englund, John Saxon, Heather Langenkamp, and Johnny Depp for a little bit. This is easily my all-time favorite horror movie. I think its rewatch value is fantastic. I also think for the horror genre that this movie delivers the full package, from creepy atmosphere to awesome visually appealing practical effects to ominous scoring, a creative plot. Nightmare on Elm Street gives you a bit of it all and tops it off with just the sadistic sense of humor from Freddy Krueger, who in my opinion sits at the top of the horror icon mountain all by himself. I think this character is just world-class awesome. Freddy is a pop culture icon, and seeing him brutally take out this group of teens in his first ride is just delightfully gory. It's a must-watch during the Halloween season for me as a kid. I remember watching this movie for the first time at a friend's house as a kid. His parents worked nights, and they had quite the impressive collection of bootleg VHS tapes. Their hallway closet looked like a Blockbuster Video. We watched this movie and so many others, but in particular this movie, I remember watching it and having my own nightmares. And no matter how many times you've seen it, Nightmare on Elm Street is just a blast of horror mayhem that's always worth a watch during the Halloween season. And that wraps up this video, guys. I hope you have enjoyed it. Let me know what some of your favorite horror movies are down in the comments. I hope you guys have a great, fun, spooky Halloween season. Let me know if you guys are going to be dressing up as anything. I'm personally going as Larry Bird this year. I'm pretty excited about that. Also, be on the lookout for my next episode of my Lost Movies of the 90s series coming along very soon. Shouldn't be too long before that one drops. I hope to see you guys all there. Thank you guys, as always, so much for watching. You guys are all fantastic. fantastic. I wouldn't be able to do this without you guys. I hope to see you guys all back in the next video. And until then, movies never say die.
This is Jack Burton in the Pork Chop Express, and I'm talking to whoever's listening out there.
Survive a war, you gotta become war.
I suppose we have to register you as a lethal weapon.
You trying to say Jesus Christ can't hit a curveball?